Welcome to our Meet the Experts film documentary panel. We're here with Lisa Cortés from All In, The Fight for Democracy, Amanda McBaine from Boys State, Lana Wilson from Miss Americana, and Sara Bernstein from Rebuilding Paradise. Thank you all for being here. I know some documentaries can take years to make, but how do each of you generally decide what subject matter you guys want to tackle or what project you like to join? Amanda, let's start with you.
How do I decide on what? That is the question. I think that there's, as I mentioned earlier, this was an article we read just randomly in the Washington Post. And we read a lot of those kind of articles and they pique your interest and you put them on the table and you have a spirited conversation about them. And then maybe you forget about them or they sit on your table for a really long time. And this is just one that kept bugging us. And I think that's speaks to whatever I'm trying to work out in myself. I had questions about our divided country and I needed to spend some time, spend a lot of time filming and editing around those questions. And this happened to offer that for me. So, you then have to take the next step, which is very scary, which is getting access, right? Like Texas Boys State, I'm calling from San Francisco, California. They could very easily have said no. And I think that's always a possibility. And you just have to take that leap in the event that they may say yes. It took a while, but they did. And I think that also is sort of the next step to what is the film you end up making is how much it resonates in you. And then really what documentary gods give you in terms of what you can get access to ultimately. So it's a little bit of you and it's a little bit of the world around you.
Yeah, I love that. I'll just second everything Amanda said. I feel like for me, you have to convince yourself that this is the most important and meaningful way you could be spending your life. The subject has to feel like the most urgent thing in the world to you. My first film was about third trimester abortion providers. And I think that it's basically the reason I became a filmmaker is because I felt like no one was telling these people's stories, and the courage of these abortion providers gave me the courage to go in and make the film. And it was because I could feel like there's nothing better I could be doing with my time right now. So I think you have to convince yourself of that, even if it's not entirely true, perhaps with everything that you do, you kind of want that to be true. But it's so true, echoing what Amanda said also, that it has to be personally meaningful to you. You have to see yourself in this person, this world, these stories, because that's how when I was filming with Taylor Swift, again, at first I thought, well, we're not going to have a lot in common. But as I filmed, the things that grabbed me that she said, for example, her expressing her own insecurities about her work as an artist, her looking at herself on a music video monitor and saying, I look like I have a very slappable face. Her worrying about people thinking that she's a bitch, that she's not nice, that she's going to seem too aggressive or too demanding. That was all certainly stuff that I related to and was really surprised to hear her voice, basically stuff that was my own internal monologue. So that made me think, okay, this surprising internal monologue of this global superstar that cuts against all of the imagery we see of her and the person we think we know, that's what this film should foreground and be about, because it's what I'm connecting to the most.
I was obsessed with Stacey Abrams' gubernatorial run in 2018. I followed it intensely for the promise that her story held. Here you have a Black woman in the South, in Georgia, which has such a troublesome history, running for governor, and how close she came to achieving that position. But out of the defeat, how she turned it into this great movement, which is Fear Fight. And, there was such a wonderful personal intersection with how I'm always looking as a Black woman to interrogate history and to find myself within that history. So in many ways, All In allowed me, one, to collaborate with Stacey and Liz Garbus, but also to continue this interesting personal interrogation about centering Black women's stories within our history in a way that we're not used to seeing. And it's a story that's transformative, that has deep roots, but it also offers a unique perspective on the history and what we thought our history was. And to build upon the work of my parents and grandparents and the sacrifices they made in the civil rights movement. It was like, whatever I have to do to get this project done. We had a concise timeline for delivery for the film to be out in time to make impact and contribute to a conversation. It was such a great joy. As you said, the documentary Gods and Goddesses definitely showed up with a tall order, but an order that I think I've been searching for as a storyteller for quite some time.
I would just like to say it's interesting from my perspective, because obviously this film started from a very personal place with Ron. I am not a director like all of you. And we had two actually wonderful partners on this film, Zan Parker and Liz Morheim, who really spent the bulk of their time in Paradise, covering our subjects, with Ron. But what I would say is what I look for, and, I'm probably also a little bit different from most of you on the panel because I'm working on a lot of projects at once. Although this one I was particularly very deep into as a producer. But I think for me, it's really about empathy, and especially with these verite films. And I think you're all, what you say about the documentary Gods is so true. Like you need the right people to sort of take you through the stories that we want to tell. But for me, I think it's really about, can we shine a light on how other people are living their lives or have to live their lives? And can you do it in a way that feels incredibly immersive, incredibly personal, and, in a way that can help, I think, contribute to change or to make somebody feel like, especially for us, like what we loved about the timing of Rebuilding Paradise coming out was that all of a sudden communities globally are feeling the effects of COVID, are feeling devastation, both personally and both as a community. So the idea that this film and, our wonderful subjects in the film can sort of help people hopefully find some resilience and some hope in their own lives right now, where, hopefully we're all feeling that a year from now, we're going to be through this, was particularly important to us. So I don't know, for me personally, it's about how will this project nudge the world?
I know this depends on where you are sometimes, but how do you guys choose your one-on-one interview settings? Because Lisa, in All In, there's this like table motif and like everyone's seated at a table, and Stacey Abrams looks like she's in this ornate library, and Amanda in Boys State, the boys are lounging on these large sofas. So how do you guys pick those spots? I guess Lisa, we can start with you.
So all of our interviews were conducted on green screen.
Oh, okay.
So the table was placed there for grounding and for depth. And then our DP tour, he actually then shot the plates afterwards. We looked at a couple of different locations that setting-wise and tonally we felt would work best for the voice that the characters and the voice and place that they spoke from. So Stacey, we placed her in the library from the Brooklyn Historical Society, which is epic and has beautiful tones, and it has all these volumes of books, and it's a space that speaks to intellectual power, but it also speaks to access. So that was why we placed her there. And then we had several other locations that we mixed and matched with our other contributors.
Amanda, how do you guys pick those sofas?
So we had the same DP. Torsten Tilo is a total genius. He's a technical wizard, but he's also a real poet, and we love collaborating with him. For the most part, this was a verite film, and the pure chaos of it was kind of the big risk. And it was, we had a certain amount of time to capture this movie, and so as any moment of control that we could create is something that we went all in on. And so that space that we created, not knowing even if we were going to be able to actually pluck these kids out of the fast moving stream that they were in the event, but we created in a dorm, basically in the lounge area, a kind of safe and quiet space, so that with the idea that we could have a moment of reflection with these kids as they were going through the Boys Day program. And I'm really glad that we did, because actually I think the ratio of usable footage to what we shot in that room was, it was very high yield compared to the 350 hours of verite stuff that we shot with 7 DPs. And we had a whole apparatus around the event, and we had very little time with the guys, but to hear what's going on inside of them. And this is a conversation also with verite, right? Like, there's some direct cinema that does not involve interviews, but in most of our films, I've found that this interior monologue, particularly with Robert, for instance, whose performance on stage as a candidate is very different from what's going on internally. And that's really interesting, particularly in something as performative as politics. So we needed those conversations. And what we got in those moments, particularly as they got more and more tired through the week, was, I think, very powerful and really made our film, what it is. So I'm very thankful always, whenever I can talk about Torsten, I do, because he really made that space not only visual, but just it was a good, comfortable space that the kids felt like they could unburden themselves. So that was nice.
Yeah. I think it's true that when you do an interview, you're kind of creating this psychological space visually through the lighting, the scale, what's in the room. And Lisa, I love how you describe the meaning of the Brooklyn Historical Society for Stacey Abrams. It's like there's so much that you're being told as a viewer by how you stage the interview, and you're entering inside the interview subject's head in a way. But then you also do need to think about, it so depends on the individual person, because sometimes you want to have a giant setup so that when people come in, they sit down and it's like, this is a big deal. You're going to reflect on your life now. I've seen some people come in to a huge setup with lots of cameras and lights. They sit down and they almost immediately get emotional or start to cry even before the interview begins. And that's because of what that kind of setup might indicate to them. But then there are other cases, and this was the case with Taylor Swift, where you want to do the complete opposite. So, the master interview in my film, it was not planned as an interview. I was basically at Taylor's apartment one day and saw a bunch of her old childhood journals were lying by the window. And it was kind of like, let's sit over there. It was a window seat. I worked on the film with an entirely female crew the whole time. And the only people who were there at this moment were me, my sound recordist, Emily Strong, and my DP, Emily Topper. And it was kind of like, I loved her sitting in that window seat, and I just sat, and Emily sat next to her. And then I sat down. Sorry. Emily, the DP, literally sat on my lap, which might sound a little strange, but it's because we were in this tiny window seat, you know, and it was natural light. I just loved the feeling of it. It looked completely different than any interview you've seen with Taylor Swift before. And I felt like the fact that me, Emily on my lap, and Taylor all sharing this tiny window seat alone, like that was the kind of Taylor who I'd seen, who I didn't feel like other people had seen, that I wanted to capture in that interview, you know. And then you automatically have something to talk about, which is these childhood journals where, you know, very self-deprecating to look back at those and all of that. So that's how we ended up doing that for this film.
Sorry, I have a little one in my background. What I just want to add to that is, I mean, I think especially with a film like Rebuilding Paradise, the natural, you know, backdrop, if you will, is becomes so important. And I think you see it throughout the film, particularly when we follow people like Michelle Johns or Woody. I mean, Michelle Johns was the superintendent of the school. And really, when you first meet her, she's touring devastated school sites. So the idea that we're getting the information, we're learning about her, but it's constantly sort of set against, you know, that devastation, or also just the reality of that moment in their life. Like another example of clearly is when we meet, there is a young family that's been displaced, and we sort of move around with them a little bit. And in the end, we wind up in their new home or temporary housing, which is FEMA housing. And that becomes such an important part of the way the conversation goes with the family, and the way that the little kids, their daughters, sort of talk about where they're living. And they say, FEMA, I'm in FEMA. So I think most often with verite films, but I think in particular with a film like Rebuilding Paradise, it was incredibly important for our very skeleton teams. And we had great DPs. We had Lincoln Els, we had Wolfgang Held, and you know, it was incredibly intimate, which I think was really important for everyone in the film to feel comfortable about sharing what they were experiencing, which was quite, you know, devastating for them.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And finally, I like to find out from all like documentarians, but is there a subject you would like to see a documentary about, whether or not you make it? Lana, let's start with you.
Start with me. It was funny because I made Miss Americana completely in secret. No one knew what I was working on because I wasn't allowed to talk about it. I was living in LA, even though I live in New York, and everyone was like, "Why are you in LA?" And I couldn't answer. But because it was a secret project, people would all guess what the movie was about. And that gave me a ton of great documentary ideas, people's wrong guesses about what I was doing. And I have to say the one that came up the most that I was intrigued by was Nancy Pelosi. Everyone was like, oh, it's about Nancy Pelosi. And I think it would be great if someone made a film about Nancy Pelosi.
Alexandra Pelosi is.
I know, of course. I forgot about the documentary filmmaker's daughter. Well,
so that's the next one for you. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued with Stevie Wonder. I just think the depth of his catalog, the longevity of his career, but also his alignment with important political movements. You know, we take it for granted now that we have Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday off, but you know, that in addition to all of the great legislators and other civil rights heroes, you know, Stevie Wonder he was strident in demanding this and writing a song about it. His work in, you know, and so I think that there's this, and I just, you know, I met him once, and I'll never forget, we were talking about a film that I produced, Precious, and he said to me, you know, I really like that scene where Precious steals the chicken off the counter and she does blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh, dear me, this man is visually impaired. But he got, you know, told me about the scene and how it impacted him in a much more moving, beautiful, eloquent way than people who are not visually impaired. I want to know about how he sees the world, because obviously it is with colors and depth that those of us who are not impaired, I think, lack in terms of our embrace and acknowledgement of nuance. So Stevie, if you're watching,
Lisa, I just want to say I will make that film with you.
Sarah?
And we will probably finance it. So let's talk about it. I love that.
We just brokered a deal here, so. Amanda, how about you?
Oh, this is a question I don't have an answer to. I will say, if we're talking about, famous people that I really hope somebody is, it seems to me that Dolly Parton needs the biggest, boldest film ever made about her. And I'm sure somebody's doing it, or she's doing it herself. I think she's one of those people who, in all the films that we've made and like all the sort of out there places we've gone, everybody agrees on Dolly Parton. And I think that's something really interesting about her. I think there was a great podcast about her. So maybe that's already happened, but I don't know. There's so many films out there to make, but I sort of feel like every time I finish one, I'm like, that's it. We've done it. There's no more films I can think of ever making again. That's what happened after The Overnighters. Was sort of, some films take a big soul tax, right? Like you just deplete it at the end of it and you think no more verite films. But then we went and made Boy State, and I think, give us a moment, we'll catch our breath, and then hopefully find another article and get fired up again.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that's all I have. Thank you so much for your time. It was great speaking with you today. And Sarah, you could get back to your kids now.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be with these incredible panelists. I'm such a fan of all of your work. So thank you, Joyce, for bringing us together.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. All of your films are amazing. So everyone should watch them.
I feel exactly the same way. It's such an honor to be with you all and to see you virtually. This was great. And I'm really excited about the Stevie Wonder film now.
I know, me too.
So in 2 or 3 years, we'll have both of you back for this.